I'm Ness Collingridge, and it's great to see so many of you here today. Some familiar faces, some new, and also from many corners of the world as well, including the Czech Republic, Canada, South Africa, got Duns, Bodley Salterton, Edinburgh, Skipton. We've got a whole range of different places. So you're all very, very welcome. Please do put where you're from in the chat if you've just joined us. Well, we've got a packed programme today, including a host of fabulous speakers, panellists, and short videos here in the main Zoom room, and lots of workshops as well, each of which will have its own Zoom link. So please do check that you have those to hand if you've signed up already. If you need any help, I'm sure you can reach out to our fabulous tech team this morning. Our wonderful conference team will do their very best to get you sorted. So you can email them mediationclinic@strath.ac.uk or telephone 0141 548 4510 and just leave a voicemail. We'll pick up the message as soon as we can. Okay, well, let's get started. And to introduce the event, here's the now Dr. Charlie Irvin, founder and director here at the Strathclyde Mediation Clinic, and the head of the law school, Professor Adeline Wilson. Charlie, over to you first.
Thanks, Ness. Thanks, everybody. First of all, just a massive welcome to you all. It's delightful that this phenomenon of seeing all these faces on a screen is still quite new, isn't it? It's not quite the same as being in person, but you do have the comfort of your own home, and I can see a number of you, comfort of your own cup, etc. So I just want to say a couple of things really. First of all, just about mediation clinics. I think there are kind of two things animate mediation clinics. That's what this is all about. And one is ideas and the other is practice. And I think the key idea is that you can resolve conflict non-violently. You can resolve disputes by talking. I think that's a simple idea. I think the practice is that people in the mediation clinic get to do it and it works. And I think that creates a virtuous circle. And I think all of those who work in the mediation clinic and others who work in mediation discover that most of the time, this thing that we do actually is helpful for people. So that's as simple as that. I think the point of clinics is to give as many people as possible the opportunity to try this out and to learn by doing. So I won't say any more. I'm just going to express huge appreciation for all who are contributing today. And I'm going to hand over to the head of the law school, Professor Adeline Wilson, for her welcome. So thanks, everybody. Adeline, over to you.
Thanks very much, Charlie. That's really kind of you. So I just wanted to add my own words of welcome to everybody who is joining us today. The Mediation Clinic is a really important element of Strathclyde Law School, and it represents so beautifully everything that we want to contribute to our community. It's run in partnership with the Scottish Government, the university, and various members of the wider profession. And I think coming together to provide that service to the public is a really beautiful expression of what we want to achieve in partnership with all of those various different stakeholders. The Mediation Clinic, of course, is also very closely affiliated with our LLM in mediation and conflict resolution. And again, engaging the students in the work of the Mediation Clinic is a key part of how we live up to our mission of providing students with a useful learning experience during the course of their degree. And all of that work is tremendously well supported and driven by both Charlie and Pauline, who are absolutely wonderful colleagues and incredible leads for the programme and the mediation and various other different tasks that they have. So I wanted to say thank you so much to both of them for all of their work, as well as for organising what seems to be a spectacular event today, and of course to Vanessa for facilitating it for us. I hope you have a wonderful day, and it's a pleasure to meet you all and welcome you to Strathclyde, so to speak.
Thanks, Adeline, and thanks to Charlie before that as well. Now, throughout the day, we'll be launching a series of short informative videos funded by the Scottish Government and designed by Charlie and the team to help members of the public referred to mediation to understand the process and get most out of it. The videos are also available on the Mediation Clinic site as well as the YouTube account. Thanks to clinic members Alan Jeffrey, presenter Alison Welsh, Abdul Zishan, Hazel Stokes, Lorna Kelly, Eunice Olatunji, and of course Charlie Irvin himself for their help making these videos. Here's the first one, and it's entitled, What is Mediation?
Welcome to our guide on mediation. So what exactly is it? Mediation is a straightforward and informal way to resolve disputes. It brings everyone involved together for a conversation with an impartial third party called a mediator. The mediator helps you and the other participants discuss the issues and work towards a solution that everyone can agree on, so you can avoid going to court. Your mediator will guide the process and ensure everything stays calm. They will ask questions and clarify things. They will focus on what's important to each of you and help you find a solution that works for both of you. Your mediator will not judge who is right or wrong, take sides, force you into an agreement, provide legal advice, shy away from difficult topics. The goal is to have a calm, safe and systematic discussion about your case so as to reach a mutually acceptable resolution. So why should you consider mediation? Here are some of the benefits. Mediation ensures that everyone gets heard. It can produce a wider range of outcomes than the courts. Mediation agreements are more likely to be adhered to than court decrees, and you can put the dispute behind you and move on with your life. What you say generally can't be used in court. While mediation tends to be quicker, less expensive and less stressful than court, if you do not reach a resolution, you still have the right to ask the sheriff to decide your case. Mediators are trained professionals, accredited by Scottish Mediation, ensuring their quality.
Great. Hope you enjoyed that. There are more videos to come, but in the meantime, it's now time for our keynote speaker, Michael Jacobs. He's been mediating for over 23 years across almost every sector, from family to corporate, and sharing his reflections on mediation in a whole host of wise and witty articles and posts. So we're really delighted he's able to join us today for his keynote address, The Mediation Dilemma, Resolution or Peace.
Thank you, Vanessa. I've been mediating now for over 30 years. This is my 31st year as a mediator. And I'm talking to you from Jersey, where I'm sitting with a group of colleagues who work for JAFCAS. And I want to start by saying this is not normally how I operate. I don't usually talk at people for 30 minutes. I usually talk with people. So this feels quite awkward and quite strange. And the way that I'm kind of normalizing it in my head is that I'm just thinking that I'm going to read you a bedtime story. And if you wish to drift off during the course of the reading, that's perfectly fine with me, okay? So here goes. And I'm really sorry. I'm going to read it right off the page because otherwise I would never remember what it was that I needed to say over 30 to 40 minutes. If you have questions, how are the questions going to be managed, Vanessa? Are they going to be put into chat? Are they going to be...
Charlie is going to facilitate a Q&A.
Okay.
Please do put questions in chat as we go, and I'll sift them for Michael.
Thank you very much. Okay, here we go. Success is a powerful lure, and mediators are not immune to its tug. We are keen to be useful. We want to provide a service that meets the needs of our clients, to help them make their problems go away. This, of course, is an admirable ambition and also one that may be fundamentally flawed. While it might sound like verbal nitpicking, I think that there is a real risk in seeing a dispute as a problem, as something that can be solved and sorted and then stored away. In this talk, I'm going to ask questions about how we approach the work we do as mediators, to revisit the notion of purpose and to ask whether we have any magical powers to make conflict disappear. I'll propose that rather than eradicating conflict, our job is to help people find their equilibrium in a conflictual world, to not lose their balance when conflict comes calling. Conflict isn't a problem. It's a reality, and one that's never going to disappear. Conflict is a function of difference. So unless the NHS offers everyone a free frontal lobotomy so that individuality is obliterated, then conflict will be an inherent part of our world from now until forever. So on this basis, I think the notion that mediators resolve conflict is a risky proposition, largely because it's rooted in fantasy. It's a bit like saying that one could adjust gravity or alter the speed of light. In an uncertain world, there are indeed some constants, and I would argue that conflict is one of these. What exactly do we mean when we say that we resolve conflict? I suspect we mean that we can help smooth out a fractious disagreement so that the parties aren't continually tripping over it. Classically, we do this by asking them to focus on their needs rather than on their positions. We offer a process other than spending the next few decades trying to convince each other that I'm right and you're batshit crazy. In these circumstances, has the conflict been resolved or only temporarily neutered? Given the opportunity, is it likely to wake up and once again threaten to bite us on the ass? So let me give you an example. I mostly work as a family mediator, helping people in the throes of relational breakdown to find a way to move forward with their lives. This involves making arrangements for their children, as well as sorting out financial matters. A recent case involved both these issues, arrangements around their son, as well as deciding what should happen with the family home. On both sets of issues, the clients were able to make proposals that the other, while not necessarily being wildly enthusiastic, was willing to accept with varying degrees of acquiescence. And then things came completely unstuck. It was around the topic of future partners. On the surface, there was a pretty straightforward proposal, namely, to wait a minimum of 6 months before any new partners would be introduced to their young son. It seemed a fairly innocuous proposal, except that it wasn't. For the next 3/4 of an hour, there was a knockdown, drag-out slanging match. Exactly when did the clock start ticking towards the 6 months? When and how would the other party be informed about the imminent arrival of the new partner? And did you not realize the statistical evidence of the safeguarding risk that new partners brought with them? The conversation, if you can apply that relatively civilized word to the exchange that was happening on screen, was disjointed, dispiriting, and played out in an endlessly recursive loop. Fundamentally, it was a case of wolf in sheep's clothing. It appeared that future partners was an issue open to discussion, when in reality, it was an emotional sinkhole of hurt, pain, and recrimination. No agreement about the timings or process whereby new partners would be introduced was going to quell this conflict. There was too much history, too much betrayal, too much distrust for any proposal to sanitize the situation. This was not a conflict that could be sorted out by agreement. Instead, this was a conflict as fire-breathing dragon, one that wasn't going to be tamed by any words on a page. The threat that it posed could not be negotiated out of existence. The conflict was an expression of who the parties knew themselves to be. Resolution would have required one or both of them to metamorphose into someone else. And as a mediator, there was no point in me trying to banish the beast. This simply wasn't possible. It would also have been enormously disrespectful, somehow insinuating that they shouldn't think, feel, or be who they were. So instead of trying to slay the dragon, I believe my job is to help parties acknowledge its existence, and then to learn to recognize the signs of when it starts to stir. This couple needed to figure out how to engage with this incendiary topic without reducing the entirety of their lives to cinder and ash. From my perspective, this isn't something that's going to be resolved. At best, it will become something that each of them is acutely aware of and learns how to approach with a greater degree of sensitivity and care. The alternative is for it to burn a gaping hole through every aspect of their future relationship. I sometimes describe being in conflict as a form of possession, that we are consumed by the conflict. In these times, the conflict expands to swallow huge portions of one's life, which is precisely what happened to me. In the last year, we've been involved in a dispute with our neighbors. In my experience, neighbor disputes involve a handful of contentious issues: light, noise, loud sex, dog mess, leilandi, and parking. I've had to add a new item to that list, that of shared septic tanks. The exact details of the dispute isn't really relevant, but the impact of the conflict, however, is shamefully enlightening. For weeks, I would wake up in the morning with accusatory emails running through my head. I spent hours of my life hatching viciously worded rebuttals to all the spurious claims they made about the septic tank. And I cheered every time it rained, hoping that the rain would overflow the tank and that the sewage would back up into their house. Eventually, I engaged 3 different companies to come out and give me a quote for a new septic tank, which I duly sent on to our neighbors, fully aware that they had no intention of participating in any purchases. The point wasn't to reach agreement, but to annoy the hell out of them. And we sought legal advice, paying more than £500 to be told that there was very little that we could do, short of taking them to court, which offered a very uncertain outcome. It was a kind of waking nightmare, but a nightmare that felt entirely justified and purposeful. My life was taken up with evil thoughts and machinations. Working from home meant that I could look out my office window and see both the septic tank and the neighbor's house, thus providing a continual unholy and unhealthy distraction. I was well and truly possessed. Sadly, there is something deeply satisfying about this kind of obsession. It provides an infinite amount of material to dwell on, to chew over, to be consumed by. My life was transformed into conflict, at once infinitely large, filled with imagined slights and recriminations, and also pitifully shrunken and diminished. It was months before I managed to wrench myself free of the gravitational pull of the conflict, before I could once again see my neighbors as flesh and blood human beings, rather than devils in disguise. And that's the thing about conflict. It's bloody hard to ignore. It seeps inside of us, inhabiting our lives and our very souls. And once inside, to call it a problem is far too bland. It is much more accurately diagnosed as a condition. And as far as I can tell, the only antidote is to accept the reality of difference, to live with the conflict rather than disappear beneath the conflict. Which brings us to peace. I think it's a mistake to speak of peace as the absence of conflict, largely because we know full well that it's never going to happen. Rather than the absence of discord, we need to see peace as the ability to step into conflict without getting infected, to disagree passionately without losing one's soul in the process, nor denying the soul of the other. Conflict challenges our right to call ourselves human. In this sense, mediation is fundamentally a rehumanizing process. Parties start out as positional crustaceans, all hard shell and very little vulnerability or openness. The mediator's job is to create enough safety so that those parties can remove the armor plating, engage as humane beings who need something from each other. The capacity to regain our humanity surely should not be limited to the context of mediation. We live in a world crying out for this kind of knowing. And if that's true, then it seems to me that the aim of every mediator should be to make themselves redundant. Parties should leave mediation with a sense of how to do peace for themselves. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that we don't do good work, only that our work is premised on the deficiencies of those we serve. Mostly they arrive at our door because they haven't the ability to escape the conflictual world in which they are trapped, and they want us to provide the key. It's self-evident that peace can't be imposed. You can take away guns, but you can't mandate the end of hatred and distrust. Only those involved in the conflict can do the necessary inner and outer work. Mediators cannot be the proxy for peace. And in our heart of hearts, we know this is true. It's an oft-quoted truism to say that mediators are far and away the least important person in the room. That if the mediator is working harder than the clients, then something is seriously out of balance. The implication I want to draw from these aphorisms is that if mediation solves the problem, but leaves the parties unequipped for future conflict, then we have in some sense abandoned peace. It seems blatantly obvious that parties should leave mediation with a greater capacity to digest conflict than when they arrived, largely because it will inevitably reappear on the menu in the future. Mediation should help them make better choices when it does. I know that many of you are probably thinking this sounds idealistic and ridiculously grandiose, but as well as being a mediator, I'm also a trainer and regularly help educate people interested in more peaceful engagement. I do agree that the road to peace is easier to describe than it is to walk, which is why mediation is an ideal context for learning, since parties are usually desperate to find a way out. Nor do I think that the principles and skills of peace are foreign to any of us, as they underpin our practice as mediators. We don't need to require new learning, only shift the belief that we should keep this knowledge to ourselves. So in the final part of my talk, I want to make explicit the potential lessons we might offer the people we work with as a practice towards peace. Ideally, the place to begin would be by gathering some information about their current abilities. One of the first questions I think all mediators should be asking parties is, why are you here? And I don't mean this in the sense of, tell me what's going on, but why is it that you can't sort this out yourselves? Embarrassingly, I don't think I've ever asked this question with the later intention. And it's worth reflecting on why I've been so hesitant to do so. Partly because I want to hear their story, the what's going on version, so that I can build a relationship with them by empathizing and summarizing, and they will see me as a wonderfully understanding and compassionate human being who they want to take home with them. Of course, this is all for my benefit, as it generates the rapport and trust that makes it possible for me to do my work. My assumption is that if I ask them, why can't they sort this out, I'll simply get a long diatribe about how uncooperative and difficult the other party is. And maybe that's no bad thing. It would at least offer me an opportunity to point out that it's almost impossible to change other people. That the only tool for change that we really have access to is ourselves. And if we want to promote different behavior in others, then the place to start is by trying something different ourselves. For me, these differences start with taking on board some key principles. Not too surprisingly, I think they're also integral to the work we do, which means we already have an intimate connection and familiarity. So what we're sharing is experience and not theory. For me, I've identified three key principles that directly impact on the capacity to step into difference, to move towards peace. I think they also provide us with the necessary framework, without which I think no mediator could orient themselves. At least I couldn't. The first principle can sound contentious, as it's the belief that there are no unreasonable people, that it is impossible for any human being to act unreasonably at any point in time. This can be an idea that it's very hard for some people to accept. This belief is premised on the fact that everyone carries a map inside his or her head, that there are no mapless people wandering about. Our maps provide the guidance upon which we make our choices and decisions. This isn't to say that every map is the same, since clearly there's an enormous range of maps out there. Accepting this principle propels one towards curiosity rather than judgment. When people behave in ways that make no sense to you, that don't correspond to your map, then the obvious question to ask them is, what the hell map are you using? Because it's bloody different than mine. People who describe others as unreasonable actually mean that they haven't the time, energy, empathy, or interest to try to understand the other person's map. By labeling them unreasonable, understanding becomes unnecessary and irrelevant. Judgment, of course, is always the easier option. It's also a dead end in both mediation and peace. Both practices are premised on the notion that differences aren't to be abandoned. Rather, they need to be explored and understood. Which leads seamlessly to the second principle, which was referenced by Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Actually, he stole it from the Quakers, but I'm willing to forgive him. The principle, so much easier to articulate than to apply, is always seek to understand before being understood. For me, this notion functions as a conversational compass, orienting participants as to the most useful place to begin. Mediators intuitively know this is to be so. Over and over again, we see parties only shifting their positions when they feel heard and taken seriously. Feeling understood is the precursor to negotiating in good faith. The alternative to conveying understanding is the attempt to convince, to try and shift the other through argument and persuasion, to talk at rather than to listen to. Only in the 30 or so years I've been mediating, I can't remember this ever working. I now explicitly tell parties that seeking to understand is a much more effective strategy than trying to convince. And the third principle focuses on intention rather than behavior. Managing a conversation always begins by managing oneself. Before opening your mouth, check that your intention for the conversation is positive and forward-looking. If you can't fulfill this requirement, what emerges is likely to be closer to a rant rather than a dialogue. Start by crafting an imagination of how things might be different. And if this seems beyond you, then try imagining the consequences of things staying exactly as they are, and then look again. From my perspective, the capacity to imagine difference is essential to both mediation and peace. Without imagination, the future is merely an extension of the past. Seeking to embody these principles naturally leads to finding ways to express them and to the core skills for both effective mediation and the possibility of peace. As a mediation trainer, I have a little mantra, which is, if you aren't doing empathy or curiosity, you probably aren't mediating. Chances are that you'll be doing some form of problem solving, on the basis of which you'll be trying to solve or sort or fix. My hope is that I don't have to say much about these skills to an audience of mediators, that you already know why empathy and curiosity matter. What I want to stress is that, unlike problem solving, which depends on knowledge and expertise, empathy and curiosity are based on ignorance and interest. Their purpose is to extend an invitation to show up. I know that showing up is not a very technical term. We also all know that nothing useful can happen if the parties aren't able to get themselves in the room. Empathy and curiosity are invitational skills in that they encourage people to bring themselves more fully into the process and into the conversation. The aim isn't to eliminate conflict, but to name it and explore it. I'm not so naive or idealistic to believe that describing the principles and skills is the same as being able to put them into practice. Having said that, the point I want to make is that they are neither esoteric or incomprehensible. And as a mediation trainer, I know that they are teachable. And so we come back to the question I raised earlier. Do we believe that the principles and skills should be the sole property of the practitioner? If we see our work as clearing up problems, then there probably isn't the need to propagate these abilities. On the other hand, If our aim is peace, then the only viable option is to disseminate as widely as possible. I wish I could say that I have a clear and practical way of doing this, only I don't. What I have is a desire to put peace on our agenda. I know that doing so would require a significant investment of time and energy. We would need to offer coaching to the parties with the aim of exploring the principles and offering opportunities for skill practice. Selling this additional effort to parties only makes sense if we believe that the conflict can't be resolved, only managed more constructively. Conflict is a given. What they are acquiring is a kind of vaccine against future infection. In the dilemma between resolution and peace, for me, the deciding factor is the inevitability of conflict. To see it as a problem to be solved is to misrepresent reality. Rather than treating it as a problem, I think we are entitled to treat it as something that is deeply problematic, as something that we struggle with, need to engage with more consciously, to learn to approach more peacefully. As mediators, we are in a privileged position. We spend our working lives in the realm of conflict. To mediate effectively requires that we develop the capacity not to be swallowed up by that conflict. That we might offer this learning to those we work with seems to me to be a no-brainer, at least not if we actually are interested in peace. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Michael. Hang on, I think I'll just spotlight myself as well, just for simplicity. Thank you so much. The spirit of brevity hasn't deserted you. And but plenty in there, and I see a number of questions in the chat. I hope you don't mind if I begin with one of my own.
Go right ahead, Charlie.
Because I'm struck. Obviously, I mean, clearly, I've known you a long time, Michael, and you know, these are themes that we've chewed over for many years. It's difficult to ignore the backdrop, the political and cultural and societal backdrop to the things you're saying. And I came across an article a few years ago by a woman called Jennifer Reynolds, where she posed the possibility that a phenomenon, she called it the rise in conflict spectacles, would make it difficult for mediation in our culture. And what she meant by conflict spectacles was high-profile social media triggered and exacerbated events where conflicts were played out in the public domain, and kind of noticing that the norms, the ways in which those conflicts are played out are particularly extreme. They're almost exactly the opposite of what you're talking about. You know, they're exactly that dragon. Anyway, I'm just curious what you make of that, you know, whether the culture itself is lending many of us models to hand from these public conflict spectacles, which mediators are actually working almost against, or that's the backdrop. So yeah, what do you make of the world we live in?
I mean, I think part of what I take from what you said, Charlie, is that conflict becomes kind of part of the entertainment industry, right? So marriage at first sight, right? The reason that people tune into that is to see couples fall out with each other and have kind of wonderfully exciting exhibited rows right on screen, right? And so I guess the risk is that when conflict becomes part of the entertainment world is that it becomes part of our diet and we begin to feed on it and feed off of it. And in a strange kind of way, we normalize it. And then that normalization, I think, also begins to have an impact on our humanity and what it is that we think of as the kind of the ideal stance for human beings, and that something gets eroded. And I think we also have to name the possibility of erosion when we talk about and think about conflict that way, because I don't think that we can take it in without it having some kind of impact on our inner life and inner world and our imagination, our imagination of what is possible for us as human beings.
Mm. Well, look, I'll leave that one alone. There's some really interesting questions which I'd like to pose. The first one that popped up was a very simple one. If peace is not the absence of conflict, what is it? The question from Robert.
Well, so Robert, I think the way that I would define peace is the ability to step into conflict without getting either consumed, possessed, or infected, right? Because if conflict is a reality, then peace isn't simply no conflict, partly because that's just never going to happen. Peace is the ability to be able to, I guess one of the ways that I sometimes think about it is to digest conflict without getting indigestion, right? To live in the world as it is, because we live in a conflictual world and we always live in a conflictual world.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to open my door because my internet's gone a bit unstable. The door's.
Well, I'm sitting in a room full of people looking at their phones, so
Let's try that. Okay, well, thank you. Next question is from Leon, and I think building on some of what you said, how do you feel about the prospect of programs such as peer mediation in primary schools of making mediators redundant as the next generation learns to resolve conflict?
I think that's a brilliant idea. That's a brilliant idea. I also, when I'm training, so I do a lot of training in difficult conversations, honest conversations, how to manage awkwardness and difficulties. I say to the people that I'm working with, because they're almost always grown-ups, so 30s, 40s, 50s, I say that, this is a terrible mistake, that this curriculum should be delivered when you're 12, 13, and 14, not when you're 42 or 52, because I say that I learned trigonometry when I was 14, but I can't remember the last time that trigonometry would have been a useful skill for me to have out and about in the world. But in terms of being able to manage difficult and awkward conversations, I live with people who more or less invite me into those on a daily basis, right? And so somewhere along the line, we've lost the sense of this being a vital and important skill. And of course, if it really is, then we should be teaching our children how to do this, right? We shouldn't be coming to it as grown-ups.
Great. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of comments on that, really talking about the dream of a generation of peace builders. Well, thank you. I'll kind of keep moving. I might ask people to probe back in a moment, but let's get a couple more of these in. Yeah, this is a more personal one, Michael, and I think there was a bit of curiosity about your own conflict, but probably many of us on the call can identify what it feels like to be in a neighbor conflict.
Yeah.
And it's no fun at all.
Oh, no, Charlie, I would argue with you that it's great fun. But it is for a little while.
Yeah, well, the fun is offset by
Yeah.
down the other side. This is from Tom, how did Michael resolve this inner conflict about the dispute with his other self, the mediator? Well, that's good.
It was really interesting because I felt like I almost had no access to my other self at that point in time. That the mediator, Michael, had been overwhelmed by I don't know what other label to give myself at that point. I felt so righteously right that the mediator self had almost no voice in that process because righteousness just drowned everything else out. And there's something incredibly scary about righteousness. And I think that we recognize that when we see it in other people, but I think it's harder to deal with when it kind of comes into our own lives, Charlie, because then it just feels so comfortable. It's like a warm bath, right? That we get to soak in and luxuriate in because we know that we are right and that they aren't. And, it's even more than that they aren't. It's the judgments and the labels that I attach to them, which feel so apt and so fitting at that point in time and so justified. And so I think that the mediator, Michael, gave up the field and gave up the space because the other Michael was enjoying the experience to such a large extent, at least initially, right? That I didn't want to invite the other one back in.
It's a fantastic insight, I think, actually, about righteousness. And I just wonder, as a slight follow-up from me, about the impact then in turn on your sense of maybe something about the morality that people bring, or the expectation of a certain righteousness that people bring into the conflicts in your mediation office. And what's it done for your insights into the people who you're working with, who probably have some of that?
I certainly feel much more compassionate towards them. And I also have a sense of what it gives them, and that if I want to unpick it or have them step away from that, that I have a recognition of what they need in order to set against the righteousness that they feel, right? That I have to offer them something that has real meaning and currency in terms of something in the longer term rather than short-term righteousness. And that's been an interesting challenge for me in terms of going, yes, I understand how it feels now. My question is this sustainable from now until forever? Because one of the things that family mediators get to say, Charlie, as you well know, is you can separate as ex-partners, but if you have a child, you're stuck together as parents from now until the day one of you dies, right? So that's, a pretty long-term frame. And so we can talk about the impact of that long-termness on their mental health, on their communication abilities, on the relational qualities that they might want to have in order to raise healthy and happy kids.
Yeah, but neighbors do have the option of moving away.
Not easily done.
Yeah. No, thanks, Michael. That's sorry, forgive me for dwelling on that. I just thought it was a very interesting challenge, probably for all of us. Moving on, Sarah has asked an interesting question. Michael's mentioned
Is this my beloved colleague, Sarah Ross, who's asking this?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So she's got a lovely question for you. I wouldn't say an easy one. You've mentioned the importance of acknowledging, encouraging clients to step towards the pain in family mediation, because that allows them to consider change rather than dismissing their positions. What does it mean in practice for you? And she's actually asking, do you feel nervous when doing that?
Not particularly nervous. So Sarah's referencing an article I wrote about trying to help people find the motivation to do differently. And it was interesting watching that little video which preceded this talk, which tried to set out the benefits of mediation. It's faster and quicker and da 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 da. And it's very interesting because I read a book by Tammy Lenski, who's one of my mediation heroines. And she argues that people really don't recognize benefits because they're not really very deeply embedded in their lives. What they recognize is the pain that they are currently going through, and that if they are going to make a change in their life, they're going to do it because life currently sucks. And that what I want people to do is to understand and recognize the uncomfortableness of their current lives. And so one example that I can give, Charlie, was in a workplace mediation as opposed to a family mediation. And I saw one of the parties at the private meeting. And what she told me was, because she worked at the weekends, she worked Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And the only day that she actually saw her manager, which is the person that she had fallen out with, was on the Fridays. And what she said to me was that she hadn't had a good night's sleep on a Thursday night for months. Because when she went to bed on Thursday night, she knew that she was going to wake up on Friday morning and go in and potentially have to see her manager. And that caused her an amazing amount of anxiety, nervousness, and stress. So she had simply not been sleeping. And so the way that I framed the mediation process was that mediation was an opportunity for her to get a good night's sleep on Friday night, right? And that was something that she recognized as a reality in her life, and that it was the notion that that pain might go away that made it easier for her to say yes to the offer of mediation. And I think that that's true across the board, whatever kind of mediation that we do, that it's the pain and anguish and anxiety that people feel that really, really motivate them. People don't come into mediation necessarily because it's cheaper, right? Or faster, right? They come in because life sucks and it hurts. And they'd kind of like the hurt to go away. And if we can help them do that, then I think that they are much more likely to pay attention to what we say and to how the process works.
Can I just offer back to you, though, that you are in fact applying your own principle there of listening first before making that offering.
Yes.
And so there's a certain fit
Yeah.
to the pitch. But thanks for that. I'll move on. There's a good few more questions. So a wee bit of concern. Rebecca's just worried about the question, why is it that you haven't sorted this out yourselves? It may come across as attacking and might get a defensive response, whereas in her particular mediation service in St Andrews, they would say things like, "What have you tried so far?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Prevented you. So just curious, I think, about the response.
And I had a colleague this morning say exactly the same thing. She's sitting across the table from me at the moment. And so I think that there are probably ways of asking the question that might make it more palatable. So my version was the starkest way, I guess, of naming it, because I wanted to make it really clear what the intention behind the question was. But I think that there are certainly probably better ways, and the timing matters, right? When you ask it, I don't think you should necessarily start there, but I think that if you ask it with a real sense of curiosity, what is it that's stopping you from sorting this out yourselves? Right? Yeah. And I think that that doesn't come across as judgmental. It comes across as curious. And since empathy and curiosity are the 2 out of the 3 skills, because I didn't really talk about process management, Charlie, which is the 3rd one, I think that you can get away with it as long as it comes out of that intentionality, right?
Sure. I think you just modeled it. You know, there is a way, isn't there? And probably a why question has always got an element of risk about it. You didn't use why in your final iteration there.
No.
Elegantly done. Sarah has added a wee example just about spectacles, you know, US Senate hearings where men were shouting over each other, and we're surrounded by these. You know, it's not unique to that culture. We have plenty in our own culture. I want to move on to a couple more questions. Ron has asked an interesting question. Do you not need coaching to participants and what's needed to get better outcomes?
Yeah, I have no hesitation going, yes, you do. But I also think that that's a role that we don't talk enough about as mediators. And so I know as a workplace mediator, I have an hour and a half private meetings with each of the parties. And that I probably spend about 40 minutes coaching them. And so there's a whole nother talk about preparation, because that's what I think it is. It's preparing people to use mediation. Because why should people know how to mediate? It's not something that has kind of common currency. We don't see it out and about in the world. It's not on, you know, Coronation Street or EastEnders, or right. So I think that if we're inviting people into a space, the metaphor that I use is a game, because mediation, I think, fits within that metaphor. But we don't explain to them how to play the game, right? That somehow there's a kind of unkindness there that I don't feel very good about as a practitioner. And so I think that we should spend as much time as we can. And it's difficult as a family mediator because I have a much smaller space in which to do that. And I have also more work that I have to do in terms of paperwork. To explain, these are the things that you're going to need to be able to do to make the best use out of this process. That just seems to me to be a sensible and generous way to think about, right, working with the parties. And I have no problem thinking that that's a form of coaching. I don't think we have to train as coaches because we know how the process works. We know the things that people can do that will make the possibility of positive outcomes more likely rather than less likely. And by not talking to them about that and letting them practice it with us as opposed to the other party, it seems to me that we're missing out on a huge opportunity, Charlie.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks very much. A few more actually. Gordon is thanking you and enjoying the image of the dragon, which I did as well. In a polarizing and divisive culture, which also seeks the metrics of success that can be
Yes.
reduced to simple numbers, how might we identify better ways of talking about what we're doing?
It's a really good question because clearly mediation does sit within a context, and that context likes to show that what we're doing is working, right? And the easiest thing to measure are agreements or outcomes, right? And it's really hard to measure peace. Really, 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 really hard, right? I don't know any metrics, Charlie, yet that would do that. I guess in my mind, rather than talking about agreements, what I think is that we're trying to help people get sustainable agreements. And sustainability is more than a short-term, yes, you are seeing your son on alternate weekends plus Wednesday nights for supper, right? Sustainability is about when things begin to go wrong again, when conflict shows up once more, are you going to be able to keep going, or is it going to fall apart again? And so even in a normal metric, if I can use that phrase, I think what we ought to be looking for is, and it's a strange thing because in some ways, I think what that promotes is that people come back to mediation, they go, we recognize that we're about to fall apart and we'd rather not to. Can we have another little dose of mediation and a little bit more coaching education or whatever words we want to fill in there so that we can handle what's going on now? And it's a weird thing to think that actually it's not about doing it in the one shot, but it's about helping people recognize that a little bit more might be really helpful at this point in time. And that they have the courage and willingness and nous, right? And they don't feel ashamed because they haven't been able to manage it because we haven't told them that, oh, this is it. You're a one-time shot and you should be able to go out of here and life should be hunky-dory, right? That we don't say that to them. We say to them, it's very likely that you're going to fall apart again. And when you do, you got some choices. One of those choices may be come back here and have another little go, right?
Maybe we should be asking people, yeah, something about their thoughts about if this should happen again.
Well, there's a whole process called the pre-mortem by Gary Klein, which, again, I sometimes use in workplace mediation, not so much in family mediation, which is, you know, Klein uses it for kind of a project management tool because he says at the beginning of the project, what you should ask yourself is 3 to 6 months from now, this project completely disappeared, sunk without a trace. What happened? Where were the cracks? Where were the breaks? Where were the weaknesses? And I think that that's can be a useful question to ask mediating parties too, right? Let's do a little future proofing around this stuff.
Sure. Great. No, thank you. Another question from Jerry. Did you ever consider mediation during your own neighbor dispute, or would it have been a bad look?
No, I was too deeply ashamed and embarrassed, Jerry.
Oh, I see. I thought you were going to say because the other party was too mental.
No,
The usual answer. Okay. No, I think you've answered that very well. And honestly, Kobe has asked, he said, like the emphasis on the absoluteness of conflict. And I think that's a good lens because it probably chimes with how people navigate conflict. How would you suggest you teach participants this truism, as if they don't see that conflict is a constant, and then they will be further disappointed once one another emerges after a successful mediation?
Well, I mean, it's really interesting, Charlie, that I'm going to answer the question from a training point of view rather than a mediation point of view, okay? This to start with, is that when I'm training and I ask people, I put the word conflict up on a flip chart, and then I say, so what thoughts, feelings, words come to mind around the word conflict? And they generate a whole host of words: shame, pain, hurt, argument, discord, war, violence, fear, blah, 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 blah. And then I say to them, what do you notice about most of the words? Oh, they're mostly negative. Yes, that's right. Okay. And then I say, so would it be safe to say that most people think of conflict as a problem? They go, yes, 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 yes. And then I say, so what do they want to have happen with problems? And they go, make them disappear. And then I ask them, so do you think conflict will ever disappear from the world in which we live in? And they all go, no. And I don't prompt them. I don't kind of, offer them a reward for shaking their heads. They just go, no. And then I go, why? And they go, well, because people are different. Right? And so I think we have a very basic understanding that conflict is part of the world in which we live in, and it isn't something that's going to vanish, right? And so I don't think that that's a problem for people to recognize in mediation either. Right? Partly because even in their relationships, if I'm thinking of family mediation while they were together, I have yet to meet a couple that were conflict-free, right? And I certainly know that in my own life, and I've been together with my wife now for 35 years, that we haven't stayed together because we've had no conflicts. We've stayed together because we've been able to gracefully, sometimes less gracefully, other times, get through those conflicts.
I think we're nearing the end of our time, but
Oh, thank God.
we're really pushing you, Michael. We're pushing you much further in your talk. A couple of other thoughts that I think are really interesting. Philip makes a really interesting comment. Of course, righteousness is a problem in terms of being entitled to have recognition of the position of one of the parties, but can you have lasting peace without addressing some form of what a just peace is?
Wow, that is a big question. I don't know if I have an answer to that one. I think unjust peace really, of course, isn't peace, because that's not how it will sit in the bellies of the people who are involved in it. That's not the word. They wouldn't call it peace. And that's, I guess, partly why mediators don't very often talk about compromise, because compromise is the same kind of quality which, right, in the room has kind of one meaning. As soon as they walk out the door, takes on a whole different hue, and tends not to sit nearly as easily inwardly outside of the session than it did when they were right in the room with us or on the screen. So I think what an unjust peace probably signifies is that there is more negotiating and more talking that needs to happen.
Yeah. Fascinating. And of course, that raises some interesting issues for us as mediators, is how much is our own inner clock about what's just and fair relevant in the two or more people that are in front of us, but I'll not go there. Thank you. And thanks for that question, Philip. I think that's quite profound. A couple more just affirmations about coaching, Michael. I mean, people agreeing with you. One question from a young crow is, if you don't have the opportunity to coach before mediation, and sometimes in some of these more rapid settings like the mediation clinic and some other work you do, you may not.
Yeah.
Could you still coach? I'm guessing the answer is probably yes, but you want to comment on that?
Well, I think you get the permission of the clients to say, it's very likely during the session that I'm going to talk to you about what it is that you're doing and whether or not that makes good sense in terms of finding a way forward, and maybe have a conversation with you about alternatives that you might want to give a go to, right? And so again, my colleague here in the room said to me not so long ago that when she asks people what it is that they can do differently, their first response is, well, he could do this, blah, 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 blah. And she says, that's not what I asked you. What I asked you is, what can you do differently? And people are hesitant to answer that question, Charlie, because it's always easier to talk about the other and always easier to demonize than it is to come up with a different strategy that you might implement, because that requires effort and challenge and learning and a whole bunch of other things that are, right, new territory, new ground, and it implies changing of habits. And we already know that's not an easy thing to do, right?
Well, to me, it sounds like you're giving yourself a little bit of elbow room at the start to do some coaching, should that appear to be the right thing in the right moment. And that's probably what a young Croat would need to hear. I think we're just about out of time. This is a simple question, maybe for a last one. It's actually Sarah again. Could Michael please repeat the name of the book is it Gary Klein?
Gary Klein. It's The Power of Something, and I can't remember what the rest of it is. He's written a couple of very interesting books. It's on decision making, and it's about how people make decisions. He has a very long chapter about firefighters and the capacity for intuition based on experience.
I think if we use our favorite search engine, that will
The Power of Intuition: How to Use Your Gut Feeling to Make Better Decisions at Work.
Very good. Well, look, can I say a huge thank you on behalf of everybody? Michael, that was fascinating. And I think just the Q&A in particular, I think, but thanks also for putting so much thought into the talk, which I think was quite thought-provoking and probably intentionally so. I think I'm going to take a couple of things away from that. As I say, the thing about conflict and conflict spectacles, I'm still going to chew over just exactly how we navigate that, but also the mediator in their own conflict. Thanks for, I think, having the humility to acknowledge that actually mediators can be quite shit at managing their own conflict. I'm sorry to say.
Well, also that conflict is one hell of a powerful force.
And your dragon metaphor, I think, caught everyone's imagination. So I think we'll stop, and I'll let you off the hook. And I know you've got people here. So thank you. Can we say thank you to your Jersey colleagues?
I will.
For allowing us to invade your training day. And I will unspotlight us and hand back to Ness.
And I'll say goodbye. Thank you very, very much, Charlie. And please don't ever ask me to do this again.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay.
Bye for now.
All right, bye. Fireside chat next time.
Thanks, Charlie. And of course, thanks to Michael Jacobs for some really thought-provoking reflections and question and answers as well. So thanks to you both for that. We'll shortly be taking a 15-minute comfort break and then going into the first of a tranche of workshops at midday, the details of which I think we're going to try and get up on the slide either before what's coming up or after. We'll see how it goes. But while we're getting organised, let's watch now the second mediation video in the series, aptly called What Happens Next?
The court has referred you to mediation. What's next? Here is a step-by-step guide. The sheriff will often order you to contact a mediation service. The court usually shares your details with a preferred mediation provider, who will then reach out to you to explain how mediation works. Some mediation providers are funded by the Scottish Government and offer free services for simple procedure actions. There are other providers, though they might charge a fee. An intake call is where you'll learn about the mediation process and decide if you want to proceed. Like mediation itself, it is entirely voluntary. If you choose to proceed, your provider We'll take brief details of your case and discuss what you hope to achieve. If you choose not to proceed, the provider may notify the court, but this won't affect any court proceedings going forward. Remember, for mediation to go ahead, both parties must agree before a mediation session is scheduled. Once everyone agrees, mediators will arrange a session that suits all parties. This session might be online, in person, or by phone. Sometimes a case might be deemed unsuitable for mediation. In that case, the provider will return the matter to court. Where a resolution has been agreed, the mediator will produce a written document called a settlement agreement. Once the terms have been fulfilled, the case can be dismissed, bringing any legal action to an end.
Hope you enjoyed that. Now it's time for a 15-minute break, just over 15 minutes, more like 20 minutes, after which you should go straight into the workshops ready to start at 12 noon, midday UK time. Of course, do adjust the time if you're elsewhere. Each of the workshops will last about an hour, and each also has its own Zoom link. So remember to get that ready during the break so you don't miss out. That unique Zoom link should be in the information email that was sent out yesterday, and it will also appear in the chat and on screen periodically throughout the day as well. After the workshops have finished, please go and get some lunch, take a wee break, and then return to this main Zoom room if you would like for informal networking between 1:30 and 2 o'clock. Now, during this time, it would be really helpful if you wouldn't mind filling out the inevitable feedback form so we can know what you like and what you don't like and what we can improve next time around. Your feedback really does make a difference, I guarantee it. Now, the link will be on screen today, and it'll also be sent out to you after the conference. We'll start the afternoon's proceedings again at 2 o'clock sharp UK time. Meantime, enjoy, just short of 20 minutes break, and enjoy your workshops at midday. We'll see you back here at 1:30, ready for the networking conference, and 2 o'clock for the second half of the conference. But for the time being, bye for now.